what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself.
Hi again, everyone. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. It is remarkable and frankly chilling just how easy it is to envision what a second term for Donald Trump would look like. For all the reasons we heard there from President Joe Biden and from what President Joe Biden will say in another democracy-focused address planned for this Thursday in Arizona. But perhaps even more chilling is the willful ignorance of Trump's Republican enablers who either don't care about their own party's slide toward autocratic norms and away from democratic norms, or don't have the courage to call it out. Trump's plan for another 4 years in office isn't exactly hidden under lock and key, buried in secret halls underneath Fort Knox or Mar-a-Lago. Just the opposite. It's all out there, hanging out there, because Trump himself has made it abundantly clear he's running on it. He's running on the idea that he will and plans to and wants to rule just like an autocrat, to such a degree that the likes of Viktor Orban or Vladimir Putin might just blush. We already told you about his insinuation over the weekend that General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, might be put to death for what Trump called, quote, treason. And guess who else is guilty of country-threatening treason in Trump's eyes? Yours truly, this very network, along with NBC's parent company, Comcast, and the network of MSNBC. Last night, Trump suggested the news media would, quote, pay a big price if he were reelected. As for those who'd seek to check his power within the government, Trump now also wants all Democratic senators to resign over the investigation and indictment of Senator Bob Menendez. Seriously. Goes without saying, this isn't about Chairman Milley or NBC News or MSNBC or Bob Menendez. This is about one guy from Florida who's already attempted a coup one time, who's apparently hell-bent on seizing power and exacting revenge on his perceived enemies. But we can't say he didn't warn all of us out loud.
2024 is our final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers. From our government, we will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, fascists. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. And we will rout the fake news media. We will defeat crooked Joe Biden, and we will drain the swamp once and for all.
So we start the hour with some of our favorite friends. Writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, is back with us. Also joining us, former Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security, Miles Taylor, is here. Political scholar, Princeton University professor, and MSNBC contributor, Eddie Glaude, is back. And the editor-at-large for The Bulwark and MSNBC contributor, Charlie Sykes, is here. Charlie Sykes. I don't know what the word is. Is it a tear? Is it a bender? Claire McCaskill called Trump nuts, and I think that's an insult to people who are nuts. I think that Trump is telegraphing something and testing something and normalizing something that he needs in place so that when he does what he says he's going to do, we can say, whoa, 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 whoa. I told you guys I was going to arrest General Milley. Why are you freaking out? And then everyone in the conservative media is like, oh, yeah, he told us this, you guys. It's tucked into the Republican platform. I mean, this is the dangerous normalizing of autocratic maneuvers. And I don't see a lot of appropriate reaction from across the ideological spectrum. Why not?
Yeah, you've made the key point that there's nothing secret about this. There's nothing stealthy about it. There's nothing ambiguous about it. He is saying what he's going to do. And I think that you ought to assume that this is his vision for a second term. And note how he has escalated in recent years. For people who think that, well, this is what Donald Trump has always been saying. In 2016, it was lock her up. And now this has moved to hang Mike Pence and execute General Milley. The brutality is the point here. And the other thing that I think ought to, be settling in is, as we recognize that he is trying to normalize all of this, is that it's naive to think that there will be any resistance or pushback from his fellow Republicans. It's naive to believe that a Republican Senate or Republican House would, in fact, say this is going too far, this is too extreme. This is the kind of rhetoric that is dangerous. This is anti-constitutional. And I mean, look, here we sit with Donald Trump at nearly 60% of the Republican vote after having orchestrated a coup, after calling for the termination of the Constitution, after being indicted 4 times, after stealing war plans. I mean, we run through the list, and Republicans look at that and they're okay with it. And I have to say that his threat to go after the news media, to use the power of the government to retaliate against his critics in the media, is, of course, right out of the autocratic playbook. But it's going to be a big applause line at Trump rallies. The base will love this. He knows that this is the pushing the button of the conservative id right now, and he keeps moving the window of acceptable rhetoric. And the fact that you have been talking about the rising threat of violence out there, the normalization of violence in politics, and where is the pushback? We're not seeing it at all, and certainly not among Republicans.
Charlie, let's pick up a conversation you and I started a week ago Friday about the role of the media. Trump is re-upping some of his dirtiest smears against the media, calling the networks of NBC and MSNBC, owned by our parent company Comcast, enemies of the people, again, accusing them of being against the country. Your thoughts?
Well, what I suggested, I think it was a week ago, is that the news media has not yet figured out how to handle Donald Trump. He's not a normal candidate. This is totally abnormal. And yet there is that impulse that, OK, if, he's the front runner, we have to cover him. Yeah, you have to cover him, but you have to give him free airtime. You have to platform his fire hose of disinformation and malice. How do you deal with someone who lies this frequently or this volubly, or who poses such a threat to democratic norms? Do you treat him like every other candidate? And I would have hoped that the news media would have learned something from 2016, but I'm afraid not, because we have one network after another that thinks, hey, if we can get Donald Trump on our show, that's a big ratings get. This is a good thing. Well, that's the thinking that made sense perhaps in 2015 and 2016 and turned out disastrously, and we're seeing the same thing all over again.
Miles, some of that comes from the fact that people think they need to understand the person who's the front runner of the Republican Party. But it's important to understand that the front runner of the Republican Party stands on the other side of 80% of all Americans who oppose political violence. The front runner of the Republican Party stands on the other side of 85% of Americans who oppose extrajudicial punishments, shooting drug dealers, shooting people convicted of drug crimes. 68% of all Americans stand on the other side of the Republican frontrunner when it comes to choice and reproductive health care. And 85% of all Americans stand on the other side of the Republican frontrunner when it comes to gun safety legislation. He was, throwing around and caressing a firearm today. I mean, you can cover him, but you can't start a sentence or end a sentence without reminding people that he's been indicted for his own conduct by 4 different jurisdictions, and that he's on the other side of 65 to 90% of the American people on every issue that people vote on.
We are living in a masterclass of silence and complicity right now in our country. It's not like any of this is new. 5 years ago this month, Nicole, I wrote an opinion piece about how Donald Trump's own people thought he was incompetent and dangerous. And you know what his response was? It was a 7-letter tweet. Treason? ? And his supporters leaned into that, right? They treated it like it was treason. That's why it was so resonant to me when I saw this piece about Mark Milley this weekend, is it's the same language he's been using for years against anyone who criticizes him. He assumes they're enemies of the state, and he's convinced millions of his followers that people are enemies of the state. This is autocratic rhetoric. I've spent the past couple of weeks, Nicole, in Eastern Europe, where there's a long history of living under the threat of autocratic rulers. And I was at a dinner, and these people asked me, is Trump going to be a dictator in a second term, or is he just saying this? And I almost blew my top. I was like, who at this point thinks he's just saying this? Yes, he will govern as a dictator. And I'm willing to submit that there's not anyone else in the United States who's asked more ex-Trump officials the question that I've asked them, which is, what will happen in a second term? I've asked hundreds of them that question now, and the answer is pretty much universal. He'll govern without restraint. He will govern with retribution in mind. He will jail his opponents. He will abrogate the U.S. Constitution. And what's astounding is these aren't our words. They are his words. This is the man who said he wanted to suspend the Constitution. And I'm really incredibly frustrated at this point because the people who've been inside the belly of the beast are saying he will govern like an autocrat. And yet you still have 50% of Republicans at least saying they want him to be the nominee. He's the overwhelming favorite. And frankly, if we put someone like that back in the White House, it's tough to think that we won't deserve everything we get after that. But we need to go into it clear-eyed because it will be the end of the Republic. And I believe that firmly.